My name is Maya Collins, and I'm 33 years old. 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving and said 7 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Don't come home this year. Rachel doesn't want drama. There was no explanation, no apology, just a door slammed shut after decades of trying to belong. That Thanksgiving, I ate alone in a Seattle restaurant, surrounded by laughing families, with no idea that the strangers sitting at the next table would become the family I had always dreamed of. And I had no idea that 5 years later, at my wedding, they would be introduced as the parents of the bride. While my biological parents stood watching, uninvited, realizing they had been replaced in every way that mattered. I remember the exact moment my phone rang, November 21st, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was standing in my apartment in Seattle, rain streaking down the window like it always did this time of year. My suitcase was open on the couch, half filled with sweaters I'd folded and refolded, trying to make the trip home feel real. I'd already checked in for my flight to Tacoma, non-refundable. When my mom's name appeared on the screen, I smiled before I even thought about it. "Hey, Mom. I was just about to call you," she said. Her voice was calm, careful, not rushed, not warm either. Something in my stomach tightened. "What's going on?" I asked. "Is Dad okay?" "Your father's fine," she replied. There was a pause, long enough to prepare me for something, though I didn't know what yet. "Maya, I need to tell you something." I leaned against the counter, staring at the small crack in the tile I'd been meaning to fix for months. "Okay, don't come home this year," she said. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. I actually laughed, short and confused. "What?" "Rachel doesn't want drama," she continued, as if she were explaining a change in dinner plans. "She's overwhelmed, and this holiday needs to be calm. Drama." The word echoed in my head. "What drama?" I asked. "I haven't even talked to Rachel in months." "That's exactly the point," my mother said. "And let's keep it that way. You know how you get." How I get. I closed my eyes. "Mom, last year I just asked why I wasn't invited to her gender reveal." "That's what I mean," she snapped. "You always make things about yourself." Outside, the rain came down harder, tapping against the glass in uneven rhythms. I watched it silently, feeling something inside me pull inward. "I already bought my ticket," I said quietly. "Then get a refund," she replied. "Rachel's pregnant. She doesn't need stress." The line went dead. I stood there long after the call ended, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. 33 years old, and I'd just been told not to come home for Thanksgiving because my presence might upset my sister. I sat on the couch and stared at the confirmation email glowing on my laptop, and like it always did, the past started replaying itself. My 17th birthday. I'd asked for a small dinner out with friends. That morning, Rachel called crying because her boyfriend had broken up with her. Dinner was canceled. "Don't be dramatic, Maya," my mom said. "Your sister needs us more right now." We never rescheduled. My college graduation. I was the first in our family to graduate without debt. When I crossed the stage, I scanned the crowd for my parents. Their seats were empty. They arrived late. Rachel had a prenatal appointment that couldn't be moved. "You understand," my dad had said later, "this baby is more important than a ceremony." I learned early that speaking up didn't change anything. It only made me the problem. So I stopped. I learned to swallow disappointment, to smile through it, to tell myself this was just how families worked. That night, I called my father. He answered on the third ring. I could hear the TV in the background. "Did Mom tell you?" I asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And you agree with her?" A pause, then, "You know how your mother is. She's just trying to keep the peace." "By excluding me?" I asked. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" I asked. "Do you want me there?" Silence stretched between us. "I think it's better if you listen to your mother this year," he finally said. Something inside me went still, not angry, not even sad, just hollow. "Okay," I said. He didn't call back. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and wet. I woke to the sound of my neighbor's family gathering next door. Doors opening, voices overlapping, someone laughing loudly. My phone stayed silent. No messages. No calls. Around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. There they were. My parents, Rachel and her husband, everyone smiling around the table, 5 place settings, no empty chair. So grateful for family, the caption read. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling. I could stay home, I thought, order takeout, let the day pass quietly. But something in me resisted. If I was going to spend Thanksgiving alone, I wasn't going to do it in the dark. I grabbed my coat, stepped out into the rain, and headed toward a restaurant called North Harbor Grill, without knowing that this one decision, this one lonely dinner, was about to change my life completely. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this space grow and brings you more quiet stories like this. Thank you for listening. North Harbor Grill was louder than I expected. The moment I stepped inside, the sound wrapped around me, forks clinking, chairs scraping, voices layered on top of one another in that familiar holiday hum. Warm air fogged my glasses as the smell of roasted turkey and garlic hit me all at once. For a brief second, I considered turning around. Everyone was already with someone. The hostess glanced at her tablet, then at me. Her smile softened just a little. "Just one?" "Just one," I said. She led me past long tables crowded with families leaning close, laughing too loud, passing dishes without asking. I felt like I was walking through a life that wasn't mine. She stopped at a small table near the window, tucked beside a large group that had clearly pushed tables together. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said gently before walking away. I sat down and unfolded my napkin, my hands suddenly clumsy. The family next to me took up most of the space. An older couple at the center, a man and woman about my parents' age beside them, 2 kids arguing over roles, and a younger man who kept leaning back in his chair to make everyone laugh. They didn't lower their voices when I sat down. They didn't look uncomfortable. They were completely at ease with one another. I opened the menu even though I already knew what I'd order. When the server came, I asked for the Thanksgiving special and a glass of red wine. The food arrived quickly, arranged perfectly on a wide white plate. It looked like something out of a magazine. I took a bite. I couldn't taste it. From the corner of my eye, I watched the family beside me. Plates were passed without hesitation. Someone reached across someone else's arm without apologizing. The older man told a joke so bad the kids groaned, then laughed anyway. This is what family looks like, I thought. My chest tightened. I stared down at my plate, trying to focus on anything else. This wasn't about turkey. It wasn't even about Thanksgiving. It was about years of being told, quietly, consistently, that I came second. That piece mattered more than fairness, that asking for space at the table was the same as causing a scene. And then the tears came. I turned my face toward the window, pressing my napkin to my eyes, willing myself to stop, to disappear, the way I always had. "Honey?" I froze. I looked up to see the older woman from the big table standing beside me. Silver hair, soft scarf, eyes that held steady instead of sliding away. She wasn't staring. She wasn't pitying me. She was concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just allergies." She raised an eyebrow. Not unkindly. Allergies don't usually make people cry on Thanksgiving. A short, embarrassed laugh escaped me. "That obvious." "Only if you're paying attention," she said gently. "I'm Helen." "Maya," I replied, wiping my eyes. "Well, Maya," she said, glancing back at her table, then at me again. "No one should eat alone today. Why don't you join us?" My heart started racing. "Oh, no, I couldn't. I don't want to interrupt." "You wouldn't be," she said with a small smile. "I'm inviting you." Before I could respond, she added, "My husband tells terrible jokes, and my youngest son thinks every dinner is a debate. You'll survive." From the table, the older man looked over and waved. "She won't take no for an answer," he called. "Trust me." The younger man grinned. He's right. I looked at my half-eaten plate, my empty chair, then back at Helen. "Okay," I said quietly, "if you're sure." She touched my shoulder. "I'm sure." They made space immediately. Someone pulled out a chair. Someone else handed me a plate. A glass of wine appeared in my hand before I could protest. "I'm Arthur," the older man said. "This is my wife, Helen, our son Noah," he added, nodding toward the younger man, "and my daughter-in-law, Claire, and the kids." "I'm Maya," I said, suddenly very aware of how small my voice sounded. "What do you do, Maya?" Claire asked, passing me the potatoes. "I work in project management," I replied. "That sounds impressive," she said warmly. "I can barely manage my email." The kids laughed. Noah leaned toward me and whispered, "Fair warning, Dad's about to tell a joke." "I am not," Arthur protested. "You absolutely are," Helen said fondly. When the punchline landed, terrible, I laughed. Not politely, really laughed. Arthur raised his glass. "To unexpected guests," he said, "who make the table better just by being here." They all lifted their glasses, including me, and for the first time that day, maybe for the first time in a very long time, I felt something unfamiliar and steady settle in my chest. I didn't feel like a problem. I didn't feel like an obligation. I felt welcome. The rest of the meal unfolded in a way that felt almost unreal. Plates were cleared and replaced with pie, apple and pecan, both homemade. Coffee followed, poured generously, refilled without asking. The kids disappeared under the table at some point, arguing about whose turn it was to hold the phone flashlight. No one scolded them. No one rushed them. Time slowed. At some point, Helen slid into the chair beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something light and familiar, like clean linen. "How are you doing?" she asked softly. "I'm okay," I said. "This is really kind of you, thank you." She smiled, but her eyes stayed focused. "That's not really what I asked." I hesitated. I wasn't used to people waiting for the real answer. "My mom told me not to come home," I said finally. My sister didn't want drama. Helen didn't gasp. She didn't frown. She simply nodded, as if the words made sense in a way that mattered. "Drama," she repeated quietly. "That's what they call it when I ask why I'm left out," I said, "or when I want to be included." She was silent for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. "I spent most of my career as a corporate mediator," she said. "Families, businesses, partnerships, you name it. And I learned this the hard way. People who accuse others of causing drama are usually protecting a comfort they don't want to give up." The words settled into me slowly. "You're not difficult," she added. "You're inconvenient to people who don't want to change." Something in my chest loosened. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding myself together until then. After dinner, when the check arrived, I reached for my wallet out of instinct. Arthur waved me off immediately. "Absolutely not," he said. "This one's on us." "I really can't." "You can," Helen said firmly but kindly. "And you will. We always pay for new friends." As we stood to leave, Helen pressed a small card into my hand, cream-colored, simple. "If you ever need to talk," she said, "call me anytime." Before I could respond, Noah appeared beside us, shrugging on his jacket. "Sunday dinners," he said, "every week. You're welcome." I laughed, assuming it was politeness. "That's really kind." "It's not a suggestion," Helen said lightly. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. I walked home slower than usual, replaying the evening in my head. The laughter, the warmth, the way no one had asked me to explain myself. I didn't go to Sunday dinner the first week, or the second. It felt like too much, like stepping into something I hadn't earned. Old instincts told me to keep my distance before I overstayed my welcome. But Helen called anyway, not to remind me, not to pressure me, just to ask how I was doing. By early December, I finally said yes. Their house in Bellevue sat on a quiet street, lights glowing in every window, the kind of place that looked like it expected people. Helen opened the door before I could knock twice. "There you are," she said, pulling me into a hug without hesitation. "We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost." That night felt different from the restaurant. Less magical, maybe, but more real. Arthur argued with the kids about homework. Helen moved around the kitchen with practiced ease. Noah leaned against the counter, telling a story about work that everyone interrupted freely. No one treated me like a guest. They treated me like someone who belonged. Sunday dinners became routine, not dramatic, not life-changing in obvious ways, just steady. Arthur taught me how to play chess, beating me every single time. Helen showed me how to make her pie crust by feel instead of measurements. The kids started calling me Aunt Maya without anyone correcting them. And Noah became my friend. Not all at once, not in a way that made sense to Mark, just gradually. sitting next to each other more often, late-night texts, inside jokes that didn't need explaining. I didn't hear from my biological family. No calls, no texts, not even a holiday card. And for the first time, I stopped noticing. One afternoon in early spring, Helen and I sat on the back porch, mugs of tea cooling between us. "Have you heard from your parents?" she asked gently. "No," I said, "and I haven't reached out." She nodded. "Do you want to?" I thought about it carefully. Sometimes, but then I remember, there's nothing to explain. They know what they did. They just don't think it was wrong. Helen took a sip of her tea. "That's a hard thing to accept." "It is." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, the families that matter most aren't always the ones we start with." I looked at her, unsure what she meant. She smiled, soft and knowing. "Just something to think about when you're ready." I didn't understand then, but something in me did. And as I watched the sunlight move across the porch, I realized something quietly, without ceremony. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn my place. I was being kept. Spring turned into summer almost without me noticing. Life with Helen's family, the Whitmores, as I slowly learned to think of them, settled into something steady and real. Sunday dinners became anchors in my week. Not events, not obligations, just constants. The kind that didn't disappear if you showed up tired or quiet or empty-handed. And that was new for me. I kept waiting for the moment someone would pull me aside and say, "So, what exactly are you doing here?" It never came. Instead, Helen asked if I wanted to help her choose paint colors for the guest room. Arthur asked my opinion on replacing the porch railing. The kids asked if I'd be there next Sunday, already assuming the answer. Noah and I grew closer in ways that didn't announce themselves. We talked late after the dishes were done, sitting on the back steps with the hum of cicadas filling the pauses. Sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about the past, though never all at once. He never pushed, he never rushed. He just stayed. One evening, as we packed leftovers into mismatched containers, Helen glanced at me and said casually, "You're family, you know." The words hit me harder than I expected. I smiled, nodded. But later that night, alone in my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not because I was sad, because part of me still didn't believe I was allowed to keep this. Wedding planning didn't start as a big moment. It crept in quietly, a shared calendar, a few saved photos, a venue visit that turned into a serious conversation. When Noah proposed, simple, honest, just the two of us, I said yes without fear. That surprised me most of all. I wasn't afraid of being chosen anymore. But as the plans came together, one question followed me everywhere. The invitations. Specifically, one line at the bottom. "Parents of the bride." I stared at it one night, sitting at Helen's dining table while Noah answered emails nearby. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. Noah looked up immediately. "What do you want to do?" "I can't put my biological parents' names," I said. "They haven't spoken to me in years. They don't even know I'm engaged." "And you don't owe them that space," he said gently. "I know," I said, "but leaving it blank feels like pretending I don't exist." Helen had been quiet in the kitchen, listening without interrupting. She came over and sat across from me. "There are ways to make families official," she said softly. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" She folded her hands on the table. "Adult adoption. It's legal. It creates a real parent-child relationship. New paperwork, new next of kin, new truth, on record." The room felt suddenly too quiet. "That's real?" I asked. "It is," she said. "And it's not about erasing anyone. It's about recognizing who showed up." I couldn't speak for a moment. "Only if you ever want it," she added quickly. "No pressure, ever." Later that night, I lay awake replaying her words. Who showed up? The phrase echoed. A week passed, then another. Finally, one Sunday afternoon, while Arthur grilled in the backyard and the kids chased each other around the tree, I found Helen folding laundry inside. "Helen?" My voice shook. She looked up instantly. "Yes, sweetheart." If I asked, "Would you and Arthur consider—" She crossed the room before I could finish. "Oh, Maya," she said, pulling me into her arms. "We already have. We were just waiting for you to be ready to ask." The process wasn't fast. There were forms, meetings, a court date that felt oddly ceremonial. Arthur wore a suit. Helen cried the entire time. When the judge signed the final papers, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not loss, relief. I became Maya Whitmore that day. Not by blood, by choice. When the wedding invitations were printed, I ran my fingers over the line I dreaded for months. Parents of the bride, Helen and Arthur Whitmore. It felt right, solid, true. 3 months before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't seen in years. Rachel, why am I hearing you're getting married from someone else? I stared at the screen. Then I set the phone face down and didn't reply. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was living a life they hadn't chosen to be part of. And for the first time, that didn't feel like rejection. It felt like peace. The wedding day arrived clear and bright, the kind of morning that feels like a quiet blessing. The venue overlooked the water just outside Seattle, soft light moving across the surface like it was breathing. I stood in the bridal suite while Helen adjusted the back of my dress, her hands steady, practiced, gentle. "You look beautiful," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. I swallowed. "Thank you, Mom." The word came out naturally, easily, like it had been waiting. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She just smiled and squeezed my hands. "I'm so proud of you." Arthur knocked lightly on the door a few minutes later. "Time," he said, his voice rough with emotion. When the music started and I took his arm, something settled deep in my chest. Not nerves, not fear, certainty. Noah was waiting at the end of the aisle, smiling the way he always did when he saw me, like I was the best part of his day. As I walked toward him, I didn't look for anyone else in the crowd. I didn't need to. The ceremony was simple, honest. We spoke vows we'd written ourselves, promises rooted in showing up, in choosing each other even when it wasn't easy. When the officiant pronounced us married, the applause felt warm and full, wrapping around us instead of crashing over us. For a while, the world narrowed to music and laughter and the weight of Noah's hand in mine. Then, during the reception, I noticed the shift. A subtle pause, a few glances toward the entrance. One of the coordinators leaned close to Helen and whispered something. Helen's posture changed instantly, not tense, just alert. She met my eyes across the room. "Do you want me to handle it?" she asked quietly when she reached me. I already knew. "No," I said, "I will." At the far edge of the reception space stood my parents. My mother looked exactly as I remembered, composed, expectant. My father stood slightly behind her, hands clasped, eyes scanning the room like he didn't quite know where to land. They hadn't been invited. For a moment, the old instinct flared in me, the urge to shrink, to brace, to apologize without knowing why. It passed. I walked toward them calmly. "Maya," my mother said, her voice tight, "what is going on?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "This wedding," she said, gesturing around. "We weren't told. We had to hear about it from someone else." "We haven't spoken in years," I replied evenly. "I didn't think it would surprise you." Her eyes flicked past me, landing on Helen and Arthur at the head table. Confusion crept in. "Who are those people?" she asked. "My parents." Her mouth fell open. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke," I said. My father finally spoke. "Maya, we're still your family." I held his gaze. "You chose not to be." Before either of them could respond, the MC stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said cheerfully, "before we continue, please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride, Helen and Arthur Whitmore." The room erupted. Applause, smiles, cheers. Helen and Arthur stood waving, completely at ease. Behind me, my mother went very still. "What did he just say?" she whispered. I turned back to her. "They adopted me, legally, 2 years ago." Her face flushed. "You can't just replace us." "I didn't," I said calmly. "You stepped away. They stepped in." "This is humiliating," she hissed. "It doesn't have to be," I replied. "But you can't stay." My father looked at me then. Not defensive, not distant, just tired. "I should have done better," he said quietly. The words landed, but they didn't undo anything. "I know," I said gently. "But knowing now doesn't change then." Helen came to stand beside me, one hand resting lightly on my arm. Arthur joined us, his presence solid and unyielding. "This is Maya's day," Arthur said calmly, "and we won't allow it to be disrupted. Security approached without drama. As my parents were escorted out, there was no scene, no shouting, just the soft murmur of guests returning to their conversations. When I turned back toward the dance floor, Noah was waiting for me, his expression steady. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. For the first time, I truly was. Because the past had finally shown up, and I hadn't let it take anything from me. After my parents were escorted out, the room seemed to exhale. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle release, like everyone had collectively decided that whatever tension had entered with them was no longer welcome here. The band picked up again. Someone clinked a glass. Laughter returned in small waves, then stronger ones. Within minutes, the reception felt whole again. Noah found me near the edge of the dance floor and pulled me gently into his arms. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I know," I said, resting my forehead against his chest. "I'm okay." And I was. Not because it hadn't hurt, but because it no longer had power. Helen hugged me next, long and tight. The kind of hug that didn't ask questions. Arthur followed, his hand warm and steady on my shoulder. "You did well," he said simply. For the rest of the night, I let myself stay present. I danced, I laughed, I cut the cake without worrying who was watching. I stopped scanning the room for problems that weren't there anymore. That surprised me. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the hotel curtains, soft and forgiving. Noah was still asleep beside me, one arm draped over my waist like a promise. I lay there for a while, replaying everything, not with dread, but with clarity. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I felt finished. My phone buzzed before noon. Messages poured in. Relatives I barely remembered. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. How could you embarrass your parents like that? Family is family, no matter what. Your mother is devastated. I read them without replying. One by one, I deleted them. Then a different message appeared. From my Aunt Claire, my father's younger sister. "Maya, I heard what happened. I just want you to know I'm proud of you. I saw how they treated you for years. I didn't know how to stop it. But I'm glad you did." I stared at the screen, tears finally slipping free. "Thank you," I typed back. "That means more than you know." That was the only reply I sent. A week later, a letter arrived at our apartment. Handwritten, careful. From Rachel. She wrote about how shocked Mom was, about how Dad hadn't been the same since the wedding, about how everything was complicated, and how they'd only ever been trying to keep the peace. She said I always asked too many questions, that I made things harder than they needed to be. She ended with, "I hope one day you'll understand." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not because I was angry, because I finally understood something she didn't. Understanding doesn't always mean agreeing, and peace that costs your existence isn't peace at all. Life moved forward. Noah and I settled into married life with an ease that still surprised me. Sunday dinners continued, louder now, fuller. Helen started calling Emily our future granddaughter long before we were ready to talk about kids. Arthur pretended not to plan for it, while quietly fixing the spare room anyway. One evening, while we were washing dishes together, Helen looked at me and said, "You know, you don't owe anyone access to your life." I nodded. I know. And I meant it. Because the truth was simple. The people who left weren't haunting me anymore. They weren't taking up space in my head or my heart. They had become a chapter, one I'd already turned the page on. What stayed was laughter. What stayed was choice. What stayed was love that didn't require me to disappear. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for the next loss. I was building something that stayed. Marriage didn't feel like a dramatic shift. It felt like settling into a rhythm I'd been practicing for years without realizing it. Mornings became shared coffee and unspoken understanding. Evenings were slow dinners, conversations that wandered without needing a destination. Noah had a way of making ordinary days feel anchored, like nothing was about to disappear if I relaxed. That was new for me. For a long time, my body had lived in anticipation, waiting for the next disappointment. The next moment I'd be told I was too much or not enough. Even after the wedding, I caught myself bracing for it. But nothing happened. Weeks passed, then months. No sudden withdrawals of affection, no silent punishments, no tension disguised as keeping the peace. just consistency. Sunday dinners at Helen and Arthur's house continued like clockwork. Helen cooked enough food for twice as many people as needed, every single time. Arthur insisted on carving whatever was on the table, even when it was clearly unnecessary. "You never know," he'd say. "Someone might want seconds." Someone always did. I started noticing how different this family handled conflict. When disagreements happened, and they did, they were spoken out loud. Nothing lingered in the air. No one pretended everything was fine while quietly keeping score. It felt safe. One evening, while Noah and Arthur argued over the best way to fix a loose step on the porch, Helen sat beside me with 2 cups of tea. "You know," she said casually, "I never worried about whether you'd fit into this family." I looked at her. "You didn't?" She smiled. "No, you already knew how to love. You just needed a place where that was allowed." The word stayed with me. Months later, I realized I hadn't thought about my biological family in weeks. Not because I was avoiding the thought, because it simply hadn't come up. That realization startled me more than anything else. One night, as Noah and I lay in bed, the rain tapping softly against the windows, he asked, "Do you ever miss them?" I considered the question carefully. "I miss the idea of what I wanted them to be," I said, "but not who they actually were." He nodded, understanding without needing more. That winter, something shifted quietly inside me. I stopped explaining my choices to people who weren't affected by them. I stopped softening my story to make others comfortable. I stopped calling boundaries distance. They were protection, they were clarity, and they were working. Spring returned to Seattle in pale colors and hesitant warmth. On a Sunday afternoon, Helen and I planted flowers in the backyard while Arthur supervised from a lawn chair like it was a full-time job. "You're good at this," Helen said, watching me press soil around the roots. "At gardening?" "At staying," she replied. I paused, then smiled. Later that evening, as Noah and I cleaned up after dinner, I felt it. The quiet certainty that had once seemed impossible. This life wasn't fragile. It didn't depend on my silence. It didn't depend on my compliance. It depended on presence. And for the first time, I trusted that presence wouldn't vanish if I needed more, asked questions, or took up space. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, older than the woman who'd once eaten Thanksgiving dinner alone, but steadier too. I wasn't trying to be chosen anymore. I already was. And this time I was staying. There's a strange moment that comes after healing. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind where everything suddenly makes sense. It's quieter than that. It's the moment you realize you're no longer carrying something you once thought was permanent. For me, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was folding laundry in our living room, the windows cracked open to let in the cool Seattle air. Noah was on a call in the other room, his voice calm and steady. Nothing special, nothing symbolic. And yet, as I matched socks and smoothed out wrinkles, it hit me. I wasn't tense. My shoulders weren't hunched. My thoughts weren't racing. I wasn't rehearsing conversations that might never happen. For most of my life, my body had lived slightly braced, as if something might be taken away if I relaxed too much. Love, approval, belonging. I'd called it being cautious. It was grief. That night after dinner, Noah and I sat on the couch in comfortable silence. The rain tapped gently against the windows, soft and familiar. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "What do you still carry from before?" he asked. "From everything." I thought about it carefully. I used to carry the belief that if I explained myself well enough, someone would finally understand, I said. That if I found the right words, things would change. And now? Now I know that people who want to understand don't need convincing. He nodded. That's a hard lesson. It was, I agreed, but it freed up a lot of space. That space began filling in unexpected ways, with laughter that didn't feel cautious, with opinions I didn't soften, with silence that didn't feel like punishment. Sunday dinners grew louder, fuller. New faces joined, friends of friends, neighbors passing through. Helen welcomed everyone the same way, with an extra chair and more food than necessary. One evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, Helen looked at me and said, "You know, you don't apologize anymore." I blinked. "For what?" "For existing," she said gently. The word stopped me cold. She wasn't wrong. I used to apologize for talking too much, for taking up time, for wanting clarity, for having feelings at inconvenient moments. I hadn't realized how deeply that habit had been stitched into me, until it wasn't. A few weeks later, a distant cousin reached out, someone who'd been loud in the aftermath of the wedding but quiet ever since. "I just want to understand," she wrote, "why you did what you did." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed a single sentence. "I didn't do anything to anyone. I chose myself." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. The past had stopped knocking. Or maybe I had stopped answering. Spring moved towards summer, and with it came a sense of lightness I didn't trust at first. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when this life would reveal itself as temporary. It didn't. One afternoon, Helen and I sat on the porch, watching Arthur teach a neighbor's kid how to fix a bike chain. The scene was simple, almost boring, and perfect. "Do you ever wonder who you'd be if things had been different?" Helen asked quietly. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who swallowed words, who made herself smaller, who believed love was conditional. "I don't," I said honestly, "because this version of me exists because things were different, because I left, because you found me." She smiled. "We didn't find you. You found your way here." That night, lying in bed beside Noah, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my parents, not at my sister, not even at the version of myself who stayed too long. Anger had served its purpose. It had given me the strength to leave, but I didn't need it now. What I needed was peace, and I had it. I had a home where silence wasn't weaponized, a family where love wasn't measured, a life where I didn't have to earn my place every day. As I turned off the light, Noah reached for my hand. "You're different," he said softly. I smiled in the dark. I know. And for the first time, the difference didn't feel like a flaw. It felt like freedom. I had let go of the need to be understood by people who never listened. I had let go of the hope that the past could be rewritten. And in doing so, I finally made room for something better. A future that didn't ask me to disappear, a life that stayed. There's a difference between knowing you've healed and trusting that the healing will last. For a long time, I had the first without the second. I could see the changes in my life, my marriage, the steadiness of my days, the way Sunday dinners had become something I looked forward to instead of something I braced for. But some small part of me still waited for proof that this wasn't temporary, that I hadn't simply stepped into another version of something that could vanish. The proof came quietly. It came the day Helen got sick. Not seriously, nothing dramatic, just a stubborn flu that knocked her flat for a week. But the moment Noah got the call, everything shifted into motion. Arthur canceled appointments without hesitation. The kids rearranged schedules. Neighbors dropped off soup. I took time off work without asking anyone's permission. No one debated who was responsible. No one kept score. We just showed up. I spent hours at Helen's bedside, reading aloud from whatever book she'd left on the table, helping her sip water, brushing her hair back when she slept. At one point, she opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "You don't have to stay," she murmured. "I know," I said. "I want to." She squeezed my hand weakly. "That's how I know." I didn't ask what she meant. I already understood. Love that's chosen doesn't need obligation to sustain it. A few days later, when Helen was finally well enough to sit up, Arthur pulled me aside in the kitchen. "You know," he said gruffly, pretending to focus on the kettle, "I never thought much about what being a father meant. I just did what needed doing. I waited. But watching you here this week," he continued, voice quieter, "I realized something. You don't stay because you have to. You stay because you belong." My throat tightened. That night, as Noah and I walked home under a sky heavy with clouds, I felt something settle into place, something solid and unmistakable. This was it. Not the wedding, not the adoption papers, not even the years of dinners and shared holidays. This, showing up when it was inconvenient, when it was quiet, when there was nothing to gain, this was the proof. A few weeks later, I ran into someone from my past at the grocery store, an old family friend. Someone who'd known me growing up, someone who'd seen me pushed aside and had never said anything. "Maya," she said, surprised, "I heard you got married." "I did," I replied politely. She hesitated. "Your mother was..." Very upset. I nodded once. I know. There was a pause, heavy and uncomfortable. I suppose families are complicated, she offered. They can be, I agreed, but they don't have to be painful. She didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I years ago. Later that evening, I told Noah about the encounter as we cooked dinner together. Did it bring anything up? He asked. I shook my head. No, it just reminded me how much has changed. How so? I didn't feel the need to explain myself, I said. Not even a little. He smiled. That's progress. It's peace, I corrected. As summer faded into fall, our lives continued to grow outward. Friends became closer, neighbors became familiar, our calendar filled with things that felt chosen instead of expected. One Sunday, while we were all sitting around the table, Helen laughing, Arthur arguing over dessert portions, Noah leaning comfortably against my chair, I caught myself watching them the way someone watches a scene they never thought they'd be part of. And I realized something else. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being left, not of being too much, not of asking for what I needed. The fear that had once shaped every decision had loosened its grip so completely that I barely recognized it anymore. That night, as Noah and I cleaned up together, he glanced at me and said, "You look happy." I paused, considering the word. "I am," I said finally, "but more than that, I feel safe." He reached for my hand. "Good. That's what home is supposed to feel like." Later, lying in bed, I thought about the version of myself who'd once believed love was conditional, who thought staying silent was the price of belonging. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her this. One day, you won't need proof that you matter, because the people around you will treat it as a given. I didn't need to say it out loud anymore. My life was already saying it for me. People sometimes ask me if I ever regret it, if I regret walking away, if I regret not trying one more time, if I regret choosing a family that wasn't written into my birth certificate. They ask gently, like the answer should hurt. It doesn't, because regret comes from believing there was another version of the story where everyone suddenly chose you. If only you'd been quieter, kinder, easier to love. I've stopped believing in that version. What I've learned instead is this. Some people don't lose you because you leave. They lose you because they never made space for you to stay. The proof is everywhere now. In the way Helen calls just to ask how my day was, without needing a reason. In the way Arthur fixes things around our house before we even notice they're broken. In the way Noah reaches for my hand in crowded rooms, grounding me without thinking. And in the way my own body feels at rest. That might be the clearest sign of all. I don't flinch when phones ring. I don't brace for holidays. I don't rehearse explanations in my head anymore. I live. One Thanksgiving, years after that first lonely dinner, we returned to North Harbor Grill. Same warm lighting, same hum of voices, same corner table where I'd once sat alone, trying not to cry. This time we were seated at a long table near the center of the room. Helen insisted on ordering too much food. Arthur complained about the chairs. Noah made the kids laugh so hard they spilled water everywhere. At one point, I excused myself and walked past the corner. It was empty. I stood there for a moment, not sad, not angry, just aware. That girl didn't know it yet, but she was already on her way out of a life that would never choose her, and into one that would. When I returned, Helen noticed immediately. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She just slid a warm roll onto my plate and smiled. That's how I know what family really is. Not the people who demand loyalty while offering none. Not the ones who call your pain drama. Not the ones who remember you only when it's convenient. Family is the people who pull out a chair without asking, who make room, who stay. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you were too much, too sensitive, too difficult, too inconvenient, I want you to hear this clearly. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. One day, maybe quietly, maybe unexpectedly, you'll find a table where you don't have to explain yourself, where your presence isn't debated, where love isn't conditional. When that happens, don't shrink yourself to fit the past. Sit down. They've been saving you a seat all along.